Hi folks, in this video we're going to be looking at painting Space Hulk bases. These have been inspired by the box art for the new Kill Team Into the Dark box set from Games Workshop, and these are set on the Gallo Dark Space Hulk, an abandoned moon-sized colony of drifting spaceship, and who knows what lurks around every corner. So without further ado, let's cue the music. To start out, I'll be using a hobby saw to score a 2 or 3 millimeter line deep into the base. And this is seen on the box art, and it's to give us a nice clear guideline to do our worn and weathered hazard markings from. If you don't have a hobby saw, that's absolutely fine, you can skip this step. It just gives us a nice variation in texture on the base. And before we paint, give it a quick brush off to get rid of any plastic shavings that have been left by the saw. Once our scoring has been made, I'm then coming in with Vallejo model colour black in just a thin coat, just to give us a nice even base coat to work on this base. I'm not being especially neat, I'm just making sure I get a thin coat all over the base. And you don't have to use the Vallejo model colour black, you can use whatever black you fancy. This is just the one I had to hand. And make sure you give this plenty of time to dry before you move on to the next step. Once our black base coat has dried, I'm coming in with a very light dry brush of Skaven Black Dinge from Games Workshop. And I'll be dry brushing this straight over the textured surface of the Games Workshop base to make the most of that texture that is there on the casting. I'm not looking to turn this grey, but I'm just making sure that we don't have a flat, even finish of that black paint, because nothing's ever flat in real life. So we're just doing enough of this to give us some textural and tonal variation. Once we're happy with our dry brushing level, I'm going to be coming in with some masking tape and to section off part of the base. I'm going to be pushing this masking tape down as firmly as I can to prevent the paint from bleeding underneath. To start out marking our hazard stripes, I'll be coming in with some heavily thinned Mechanicus Standard Grey from Games Workshop. I want to thin it down a little bit more than normal, but not so thin that it starts to run away from you when you put it down onto the base. And I'm doing steady motions here in a straight downwards line, and I'm trying to get these evenly spaced. It doesn't matter if you're not perfect, just make sure that the base is in a position where you can drag this down in a straight line. And if you really don't feel confident, you can pull out extra pieces of masking tape and use them as guidelines. We are going to be weathering this up later, so it doesn't matter that these lines aren't perfectly straight. And especially as you're going to be sticking a model onto this, you really won't notice if there's some slight imperfections and waviness in these lines. And you will find that it's much easier to do these stripes in a top to downwards motions rather than trying to do this at an angle. So try and maneuver the base in a way that'll make this nice and easy for you to draw these lines downwards. And as you can see, I haven't been particularly perfect with these. Once I'm happy with my markings, I'm then coming in and painting up into the spaces with the same thinned Mechanicus Standard Grey. You may also find that as you're filling them in, you have the opportunity to neaten out any slightly wobbly or wonky lines that you may have done. And the trick with this is to keep your paint thin, and don't worry if you go onto the masking tape or over the line that we've cut in with the hobby saw. Just take your time and concentrate on getting nice, smooth coverage with the Mechanicus Standard Grey. After 3 thinned coats of the Mechanicus Grey, mine looks something like this. Once I'm happy with my Mechanicus Standard Grey stripes, I am layering up over this with Dawnstone from Games Workshop. And I'm leaving a little bit of Mechanicus Grey at the edges, and I've thinned this down to a similar consistency as I did the Mechanicus Standard Grey to make sure it flows nicely and it's easy to make corrections. And I'm building this up in a few layers, and I'm working each layer slightly more towards the middle, and that way you get an ever so subtle transition, and it doesn't matter so much about wobbly lines as it gets hidden by the slight fading of the two colours of grey. And once we are happy with the coverage of the grey, we can then remove our masking tape, and this should If we've pressed down hard enough at the beginning, give us a nice clean line between the black base and our hazard stripes. And don't worry if you've got a little bit of paint bleed, we can always touch up with our base colour black or do a 50-50 mix of the black and the Skaven black dinge and just touch up the areas around the edges of the hazard stripe to neaten off that finish. To make these grey stripe markings look like they've been there for thousands of years in the Gallowdark and have started to be faded away and chipped by the ever-present treading of Imperial Breacher boots, I am coming back in with the base coat black and I'm doing some scratch markings and little dots around the edges of the stripes. As you notice at first, this does look a bit peculiar, but if you go all the way around with these and if you just sort of tap with your brush and do various uneven markings, you'll soon find that it starts to look like natural fading and chipping. You keep your paint thin and quite translucent and you'll find that it really allows for some fading and weathering away. And it's very easy to go overboard with this, so I try to do a little bit, step back and take a look at it, because you'll find that if you do too much of this, you'll lose your markings entirely. I'm then doing a paint strip of the black down the area where we did our strip beforehand, that cut we made with the hobby saw, and then with a really thin section of the black just covering over that area at the back and wicking it away with a wet brush. And this is going to help fade out any mistakes that we made when we were doing our grey stripes earlier. If you think you've gone a bit over the board with your weathering, you can thin your paint down to the consistency of a wash and go all over the base to really allow everything to have a much more grimy and faded feel, and you can wick away any super wet bits with your finger to really add to that variant texture and colouring on the base. As an optional step, I'm coming in with some rust coloured weathering powders to add some colour variation to this base. There are little bits of this on the official bases from Games Workshop, but if you're happy with the base as it is and want to go for that more monotone look, fantastic, go ahead and stick your model on it. There's no real commitment to having to do this weathering powder. And I'm just brushing this on out of the pot and onto little bits of the base and feathering it out with the brush. And I recommend not doing too much of this, but doing it down a little split in the base and a little bit over onto the white hazard stripes just to hide out any final rough edges. And I find that it's just a nice bit of colour variation that allows everything to pop off the black base. And with that, the Space Hulk base is now complete, ready for your Kroot warbands and your Imperial breaches to duke it out in the corridors of the Gallowdark. If you like this tutorial, why not consider subscribing? It's free of charge, it helps me out, and you get further updates in your YouTube feed on further videos just like this one. So, until next time folks.